All right, chapter 4, or part 4, the true and living God. So, having established at this point that worship is inevitable, that as human beings, this is something that we naturally and inevitably are going to engage in, the question is, what should we worship? Right? What is the end that we should be ultimately looking towards? What is it that we want most deeply, most desperately? Even if we kind of deceive ourselves into thinking we can get it this way or that, what is it at our core that we're longing for? And this really kind of puts us in the territory of what the ancient world was all about. Our ancient ancestors understood the question was never whose God is real. It's which God should we worship, right? Which God is supreme? Which God is the best? Which God is going to, champion our cause, and et cetera, et cetera. So who should we worship? Once we're thinking in these terms, this starts to get us into the right frame of mind. So the ancient question, what ought we to worship? What leads to life? What leads to peace? These are things that we deeply want. And I would argue at the core of everything else that we're doing, life is in fact what we're looking for. It's what we long for. We're all in somewhat of an existential crisis, realizing that we're going to die. And so life is the thing that quickens us, that moves us around from day to day. It's at our core and nature, who and what we are. And it's the missing piece to ourselves that we long for. We have this principle, and we've talked about this before. God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself. The idea is that a seed will always bring forth after its own kind, right? Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. Wherefore by their fruits ye shall know them. So we're going to get the fruit of whatever it is that we, like we said, we've worshipped. The seed matters. The word matters. So as it gets planted, it's going to take root, and we're going to be able to compare the difference in effect that is manifest here on earth. So you might understand the difference between a corrupt tree and a good tree. But the sense is, as we've said before, every idea, an ideal, an ideology, and belief system bears some kind of fruit. Our fundamental longing, though, is for life. And so, if we want the fruit of the tree of life, then we have to seek the God of life. In other words, we have to unite with the source of life itself, that thing that brought creation into existence. And this is where there has to be a little bit of a stepping off point from, in parts really 1, 2, 3, up to this point. We've talked about phenomenology, right? Your experience with the world, the inevitable sort of spiritual realities that you're going to encounter in your day-to-day life. And at this point, we have to turn to something that is outside of ourselves. As soon as we start trying to figure out what we're going to worship, it's not so much about what we're creating as much as it is what we're receiving. Right? This naturally is going to be something that is bigger than any one of us. So when we're talking about the source of life itself, we're talking about a gift that comes down from above. And so this brings us to the ancient Israelite God, Yahweh, or known as Jehovah. Essentially what the meaning of this name is I am. Its being, its existence, its life. It's even said to kind of imitate the sound of inhaling and exhaling, or crying, right? It's the first thing a baby says when it's born. The idea is it's the spirit, right? It's breath, it's life itself, it's essence. And so who is this God, right? When he reveals himself to Moses, he says, I am that I am. In Lectures on Faith, we get a series of attributes and characteristics. We read in other places that he's life, he's light, he's truth, he's conscience, your ability to discern what's right and wrong, intelligence, justice, judgment, mercy, and love. He's the culmination of all of these attributes. We also get to know him in the stories that we get, the narrative that we get in the scriptures. So Jordan Peterson does this interesting thing that I think appropriately fits here, where he says, there's a sense in which you can approach the Bible and you can see, okay, this is kind of like a hypothesis, right? We're getting like a snapshot here and a snapshot there. And the idea is that there's some kind of coherence between all of these that reflect back to some kind of single image. And so he would say something like, okay, well, what is God? God is the spirit of creation, right? The spirit that brings light forth from darkness and divides things such that we have some kind of ordered creation. He'd say it's the spirit that is with you in the cool of your garden, when you're standing there in a non-self-conscious, secure sort of condition. He'd say it's the spirit of judgment against Cain, right? Who doesn't offer the sacrifice that he could. It's the spirit of preservation. It's the spirit that calls you to adventure, as in the case of Abraham, that opposes tyranny, right? That calls the Israelites out from Egypt's slavery, that guides you to a better world as they're making this journey through the wilderness to the promised land, that warns you against self-destruction, as the prophets do when they're coming and saying, hey, you came and you made a covenant with God and you guys are abandoning that and it's going to have dire consequences. So that would be kind of a Jordan Peterson approach. I do believe that there has to be kind of a stepping off moment at some point where you cross over the threshold from approaching things like a scientist, right? And postulating and proposing hypotheses and collecting data to try and synthesize this or that with your own reasoning, and accepting and evaluating revelation which comes down from above, right? In the same manner that your life is something that came down from above. You didn't will yourself into existence. You are engaging with a world that was gifted to you. And so, we have to accept at some point that there's an external reality outside of us. And our lot is to engage properly in the context of that. So what we get in the scriptures is the revelation of God to his people. This is what we've been handed. This is what we're working with to start. We also get to know him through the law of Moses, the law that God gives, which is, again, going to be an expression of, a description of him in various different contexts. Again, we have purity laws and sacrifice laws and different things to set Israel apart from the rest of the world. And of course, we have prophecy, right, concerning Israel's downfall, with prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, but also their future redemption and their renewal and their healing and how they'll be gathered again and restored as a people. And that despite that generation's wickedness, that God still has this sort of everlasting love for them and intends to gather them back, right? These things all reveal the character of God, that he seeks to give them peace and exalt them and prosper them and give them eternal life. So the idea with all of these stories is hopefully they should get us in the ballpark, but ultimately there does have to be a moment of direct experience. These things kind of frame our understanding to get us pointed in the right direction, but ultimately God can't just be a conception in your mind, but you have to actually engage with that spirit in your life. You have to ask yourself, what is my experience of light? What does that tell me? What does that voice tell me? And live according to it, because it will reveal greater and greater things to you as you pursue that course. Todd often talks about the idea of the God that we imagine up unto ourselves. And for as long as we stay in the realm of kind of intellectual, trying to put the pieces together on our own based on things that we see and whatnot, it's always going to be a projection of the best that we can come up with. When in fact, again, there are greater realities that we can't perceive, that we have to perceive only by revelation. We get verses to this effect in Jacob. He says, man can't find out God by searching. He can't understand his ways. He has to be revealed. And Bruce R. McConkie says something similar. He says, God stands revealed where he remains forever unknown. This is the only way in which you can come to know God, is through direct experience with him. And then, of course, perhaps the most important piece of the story here in getting to know this God, Jehovah, is in Jesus of Nazareth and the Messiah. So the idea of the Messiah is he is the embodiment of the Word of God, which means the law and the prophets are going to be fulfilled in him. They come together over here on this side on the left. The other notion we have is that he is the embodiment of the Spirit of God in an earthly context, right? In his own time and sphere and culture and the place in which he shows up, the Spirit of Jehovah is fully manifest in him. So we get language, for example, in the book of Mosiah. And because he dwelleth in the flesh, he shall be called the Son of God. And having subjected the flesh to the will of the Father, being the Father and the Son. So sometimes there's confusion. Well, is this some kind of like modalist doctrine? Is this like a, just really poor understanding of the Trinity? Or, was Joseph evolving his doctrine over time? And the issue really with all of the theological sort of back and forth gets resolved pretty simply when you understand that a son is just the representation of the will of his father. That's the idea. The manifestation, the embodiment of that will in a new context, right? In a new body, which could mean on one level specifically, right? In a new physical body. But that body also has implications about, its context, its time, and things of that nature. So the Son of God is the manifestation of the will of God, of the Spirit of God on earth. And so I know rabbis even to this day, will make a big deal about how the Messiah was never supposed to be God. He's a man, and this idea that he's God is kind of a sort of Christian idea. But when you stop to think about it, how could he not be? How could the culmination of all law and prophecy and everything that God has ever said and a single person not be the manifestation and the revelation of God? We even sort of get a sense, right, with Moses, that he was to be God to Aaron, and Aaron was to be his spokesman to the people. So even in that kind of sense or context, he's the representative of God. Now, there tend to be layers and degrees to this, right? The symbolism stacks and it harmonizes in interesting ways. And so it opens up the possibility for that to be a fulfillment in a more physical and literal way as well. But this is what's going on in essence. So Christ is the love of God fully manifest. The character of God is fully manifest in the atonement of Jesus Christ. And we get something interesting here. We realize that the thing at the top of the pyramid, as far as creation goes, all creation, is self-sacrificial love. And that's what binds the whole thing together. This is the principle upon which life operates. We have this idea that love unto death brings forth life. Christ said, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit." We read in Isaiah, "With his wounds we are healed." And again, there are non-arbitrary ways in which you can kind of think about this principle at work. Jonathan Pageau, who, again, I would recommend his and Matthew Pageau's work. I would, of course, tweak a couple of things in light of the restored gospel, but by and large, do a great job kind of sketching out the landscape here. But Jonathan makes this great point that if, for example, you have a quarterback on a team, the team needs to know that the quarterback cares about them, right? That he's willing to go the extra mile and spend the extra time to be a dedicated leader. Because if he just wants to make it all about himself, well, the whole thing eventually falls apart, right? Who wants to help that guy? Who wants to help a leader that has no self-interest in them? That just turns into tyranny at some point. And so things start to break apart. The only way to bind something together is for there to be this sort of mutual conversation of love and then reciprocal love, right? So we have this idea that we love him because he loved us first with Christ. This is the law that holds all creation together. And it gets manifested in the atonement of Christ. So to zoom back out to creation here, when God first creates the world, we see in Genesis, creates everything, he says it's good, right? And then he gets to the end and he says it's very good. And that's because all things are in harmony with his order, with his will, with his word. All things are functioning properly. So within the created order, we see God, right? The spirit of creation that's sort of animating everything else. In a sense, when creation is good, the body of creation, all of the physical planets in their regular motion and the plants and the animals and the people and everything was a reflection of God's character. And this brings us to something that's really unique about the God of Israel, about Jehovah. And that is this notion that he is one, right? So standing in contrast with polytheism, the idea that God is one is the idea that all things have their proper place in him. All things in creation are comprehended by God. There aren't disparate forces for war and love and fertility and the sea and the sky and time, and the way that, the Greeks sort of conceptualize this, where you've got all of these different forces that are kind of at odds with each other, and things are chaotic. And, if you want the favor of one God, you have to go and worship that God. But then if you need the favor of another God, you have to turn and worship it. And so you're kind of pulled in several different directions, right? Because you don't see there being any sort of coherent order to the universe. That's kind of the essence of the polytheistic view. Whereas what we get with the God of Israel is this idea that there's a oneness, that all things have their proper place, that being the Father of creation, that all things are balanced and represented in him. Okay, so what does it look like to worship God? Well, we talked a little bit already about the idea of engaging with your experience of God. It starts with your direct experience of light in your life, engaging with that. D&C 6 says, "Look unto me in every thought, doubt not, fear not," right? This gets, again, at the idea of attention and worship. The way we move towards something is by looking to it in every thought, right? Sort of repurposing all of the things in our life towards that end. D&C 84, "For you shall live by every word that proceedeth forth from the mouth of God." This is the key here. "For the word of the Lord is truth, and whatsoever is truth is light, and whatsoever is light is spirit, even the Spirit of Jesus Christ. And the Spirit giveth light to every man that cometh into the world, and the Spirit enlighteneth every man through the world that hearkeneth to the voice of the Spirit." And then lastly, John 4:23, "But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him." So how do we worship God? Well, the most fundamental way we can do that is by putting our attention on that which is light, and letting that spirit of truth and of honesty move through everything that we do and inform everything that we do. We read in other places that which is of God is light, and he that receiveth light and continueth in God receiveth more light, which groweth brighter and brighter until the perfect day. This is the path of coming to know him. This is the path of pursuing him. You start with the word of God, which is his communication to you, your experience of light as it shows up in your life. And as you follow those more subtle intimations, that revelation will grow in your life. As you sacrifice other things towards its end, to live by that living voice of revelation, it's like tuning into a radio frequency, which gets clear. So, in order to get the tree of life, we need the word of God, which comes from heaven. We plant it, and it bears its fruit. So, what's the nature of life? Well, we can use the symbolism and the imagery of a tree to kind of represent this really well. The essence of its nature is increase, right? It's growth, it's perpetuation. Christ says, "I am the vine, and ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me ye can do nothing." So imagine we've got this branch over here that bears fruit because it's grafted into the source of life. On the other hand, what's the nature of death? The nature of death is entropy, right? It's that things break down into their constituent parts, basically into nothingness. When the spirit that animates them essentially is removed, when the source of life is removed, with time, everything just kind of breaks down into nothingness. So to kind of go over some of the language here, "It was appointed unto man to die. Therefore, as they were cut off from the tree of life," it's cut off from the source of life, right? "They should be cut off from the face of the earth. And man became lost forever, yea, they became fallen man." And one thing to note is when you get the wording "cut off" in the scriptures, usually that refers to death. In 2 Nephi, "By the law no flesh is justified, or by the law men are cut off. Yea, by the temporal law they were cut off, and also by the spiritual law they perish from that which is good and become miserable forever. For behold, the righteous shall not perish, for the time surely come that all they who fight against Zion shall be cut off." In Malachi, "All that do wickedly shall be stubble, and the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. So what's the consistent imagery here? When you're removed from the source of life, if you were to take a branch and cut it off and remove it from the source of life, it's going to be subject to entropy. It's going to be subject to decay and fragmentation, and it's going to just break down like what God says to Adam, dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. That's the nature of death. So everything at all times is moving in one of two directions. It's either moving towards life or it's moving towards death. Okay, a couple of other notes to hit that are important on this topic. I want to take a minute to talk about self-deception. So in your life, as you're listening and yielding to the Spirit of God and to the light of Christ, inasmuch as that's what your attention is set on, it's going to inform your feelings, the narrative that you have about the world, your priorities in life, your beliefs. But if and when you take your attention off of Christ and you move it to something else, then it in turn, as we discussed previously, is going to reinform and renegotiate all of those things. Your feelings in a given moment will change. The narrative through which you see the world and you understand the world is going to change. Your priorities will change. Your beliefs will change. All of these things will shift. The very lens with which you sort of perceive the world is all going to be colored by whatever it is that you worship, whatever it is that your attention is set on and you're entertaining. So some of you have heard me share this story before in other videos, but I think it just does a great job illustrating kind of this principle here. And even if this exact thing hasn't happened to you, when you hear the pattern, you'll recognize this as a familiar experience. So imagine we've got a couple, and this is a true story, but there's a couple, and they've recently had a baby, and they're laying in bed at night, both asleep, and in the middle of the night, suddenly the husband hears the baby crying, and he has this initial feeling, this initial prompting, I should go and I should get the baby. But then he immediately kind of blocks it out and thinks to himself, no, I've got work tomorrow. I'm really tired. I'm going to have to get up early. I'm just going to let my wife take care of it. And he lays there in bed. And as he's laying there, the baby keeps crying. His wife is still asleep. He starts to get upset. He starts to think, man, is she just like waiting to see if I'm going to do something? It's this like, who cares less sort of deal. And then as time goes on, he thinks, I think she's intentionally doing this. I think she is being really selfish about this. And then time goes on and, the baby's still crying and eventually gets to this place where he thinks, well, why am I doing this? Doesn't she understand that I've got to get up for work in the morning and she's the one that wanted to have this baby in the first place, right? And so there's like this solidification that happens within his own self-deception. What's happening here is the moment, again, truth is presented to you, light is presented to you, and you choose to turn your attention to focus on something else. The spirit that's animating you is going to come and it's going to fill the void, right? So if you are not aligned to truth and to light, and you're not honest with yourself in that way, as soon as you resist it in any degree, another spirit is going to come and it's going to give you a narrative that justifies you in your decision. And that's going to be what begins to feed you. And so it's going to change your beliefs. It's going to change your feelings. It's going to change the way in which you understand the world. And it's all going to make logical, coherent sense kind of internal to itself. It's a question of what spirit is animating you. So when you resist the light or your conscience in any degree, you turn your attention away from it and towards something else. That's when you're susceptible to self-deception. So we have to look where we want to go. Right? What you attend to is the direction you're going to move. And so if you're not careful, then the spirit of that thing will begin to animate you. Okay, so a few last points here. What is idolatry? Idolatry is to worship anything that's not ultimately rooted back in God. And the reason for that is because he's the source of life. Anything else doesn't have life in and of itself. It's dead. It's a branch that's been cut off. It might be a really big branch that can kind of persist on its own residual life for a little bit longer. But the second something gets cut off, its days are numbered. So this is why worshiping anything that's not God is ultimately just idolatry. Really, there are two options. It's either idolatry or you're worshiping God. Another way to put this is you're worshiping body without spirit, right? So if we turn this sort of model of creation upside down and we get rid of the purpose and we're just focused on the body of something, that becomes idolatrous. It's parts without purpose. So anything removed from life is dead by definition. An example of this, and I'm not saying that eating meat or plucking flowers is inherently evil, but it's a great symbol for kind of this larger reality. When you just want the body of something and you're ignoring the life that animates it, that puts you in trouble if you're not respecting some kind of higher order. And a good example of this, we talked about in a prior episode, is loving your car. Having a car is a relative good. It's a proximate good, right? It allows you to do things. It allows you to perhaps do good things. But when the obsession just becomes about the car in and of itself, and that becomes your whole life and your whole personality is the car, you're loving the body without the purpose, right? A car is a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. All of these things, all of these bodies, if you will, these creations or things out there in existence, all have an animating spirit behind them. And you have to look back to the source of life if you want to stay aligned with and in harmony with life itself. The second your attention goes to the body of something, loving the thing in and of itself, that's when you're in trouble. So Paul says to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life. Hopefully that's clear why at this point, right? If your attention is on God and your sacrifice and your worship is all directed towards that end, that will lead you to life ultimately. But to the extent you're carnally minded, you're focused on the body, you're focused on the expression, you're focused on the physical piece at the expense of the greater, higher purpose behind it, that will lead to death, right? If you're focusing on something that's dead, it's going to kill you. So to kind of root this back into the ancient world, as an example, Baal or Baal-zebub wasn't seen as a non-existent god, but a rival god to Jehovah, the prince of the devils, as they called him. In Deuteronomy, we similarly read, they sacrificed unto devils, not to God, to gods whom they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. So devil is actually also related to the concept or the idea of death. The Latin word diablos, which is the same kind of root as diabolical, right? It means to throw things apart, to scatter things, again, to get at this force of entropy. So it's very consistent here with the language in 2 Nephi 9. It says, oh, the greatness of the mercy of our God, the Holy One of Israel. He delivereth his saints from that awful monster, the devil and death and hell, right? Hopefully you can see how symbolically those are all very, very tightly related, very closely related. It's entropy, right? It's death. And thus we see the devil will not support his children at the last day, but doth speedily drag them down to hell. So this is the whole lie, right? With idolatry, is that it seems like it's going to fill this void that you have, this longing for life, but it's always fleeting and it's always temporary and it will never be enough. And so even though, you will worship it and you will pursue that path, the place it inevitably leads will be death. This is why it says the devil will not support his children at the last day. So to put it in perspective here, the truth is that everything is either consecration or idolatry. Those are your only two options ever in life. Are you doing everything with an eye single to the glory of God, from your job to your activities to every moment, decision, the words that you speak? Is it all consecrated towards God, towards a higher purpose? Or are you instead pursuing different things as a means in and of themselves? So these are the decisions to think about. In 2 Nephi 26, for example, we read, but the labor in Zion shall labor for Zion. For if they labor for money, they shall perish. Right? If you're laboring for the end in and of itself, then again, you're in a bad spot. Right? That's idolatry. You have to labor for the higher purpose. Christ also said, no man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And we get another distinction here. Zechariah, this is prophecy of the New Jerusalem. He says, "In that day there shall be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord, and the pots in the Lord's house shall be like the bowls before the altar." The meaning here is everything, down to the bells of the horses, is going to be consecrated to God's purposes. It's going to be a reflection of and an offering towards His Spirit and His will. So all of these things kind of culminate and come together in Him. On the other hand, we have Moroni, who's rebuking the Gentiles in the last days and says, "Behold, ye do love your money and your substance and your fine apparel and the adorning of your churches more than ye love the poor and the needy and the sick and the afflicted." Right? So you can cross into this point with even beauty and especially with riches, where the thing itself becomes more important than the life behind it. So the option at all times is, are you going to worship the living God, or are you going to worship dead idols? Their idols are silver and gold, it says in Psalm 115, the work of men's hands. They have mouths, but they speak not. Eyes have they, but they see not. They have ears, but they hear not. Noses have they, but they smell not. They have hands, but they handle not. Feet have they, but they walk not. Neither speak they through their throat. They that make them are like unto them. So is everyone that trusteth in them. Right? Again, this principle of you become what you worship. If you worship death, you're going to bear the fruit of death in your life. Wherefore men are free according to the flesh, and all things are given unto them which are expedient unto man, and they are free to choose liberty and eternal life through the great mediator of all man, or to choose captivity and death, according to the captivity and power of the devil. For he seeketh that all men might be miserable, like unto himself. So we're going to get into some of this a little bit later, but Christ says as well, "Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth unto destruction, and many there be that go thereat. Because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way that leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it." So we can think, to go back to a couple of episodes ago, when we talk about this notion that you are engaging with all manner of spirits in the world. There's a variety of spirits, of ideas and ideals that you can yield to. What Christ is saying is only one of these takes you to life, right? That's the straight gate through which you have to pass. That's the path that you have to walk. That's straight and narrow. And that's to worship God. Any other path, it doesn't matter. If it's not the source, it will result in death and destruction. That's the great secret here. All of these other gods, all of these other ideas, in fact, are just a front for death, which is what they ultimately are. We get this notion in Nephi, right? "Behold, there are saved two churches only. The one is the church of the Lamb of God, and the other is the church of the devil. Wherefore, whoso belongeth not to the church of the Lamb belongeth to that great church, which is the mother of abominations, and she is the whore of all the earth." The whore, because imagine, we've got churches here. Churches are symbolically associated with women, right? You've got the mother church. You've got Israel, who's the wife to Jehovah. That's the relationship between the two. The church of Babylon, the mother of abominations, is the whore of all the earth because she is indiscriminate about who her husband is going to be, right? She'll have several husbands, any husband. Any and every idea fits into this church, into this body and expression. It doesn't matter what it is. It's anything other than what God is. So the takeaway is, as Hugh Nibley put it, right? We have the doctrine of the two ways. It's either life or it's death. This is the decision that's put before us in all times and all things. And the daunting thing about seeing life symbolically through this lens is you realize that nothing is free from this. No decision is free from either being attention set on something that doesn't lead to life or something that's been consecrated to God. So we have to choose, as Joshua said, right? Choose this day whom ye shall worship. And if we want life, if we want the fruit of the tree of life, then we have to pursue the God of life and listen to and obey His word.